They bid on
Stay
her
back.
like livestock.
I don't want to hurt you.
$50,000 for a homeless girl
Control
with nothing
yourself,
but the clothes
beast!
on her back and numbers in her head. But the Vampire King paid $10 million. Not for her body, for her mind. She could see patterns others couldn't, solve puzzles that had stumped immortals for centuries. In 87 days, she went from an auction block to a throne. She stood there in chains, calculating her survival odds, not knowing the Vampire King was calculating something else entirely, her worth. This is how a girl the world called worthless became priceless. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start 3 months earlier, when Serafina Ashwood still believed the world made sense. The thing about hunger is that it changes you. Not all at once, not dramatically. It's the slow erosion of dignity, one skipped meal at a time, until you're standing behind a restaurant at 2 in the morning, elbow deep in garbage, and you can't remember the last time you felt shame about it. Sarah's hands were numb. February in the city meant frost on the dumpster lid, ice crystals forming in the gaps between trash bags. Her fingers, once steady enough to balance ledgers down to the penny, now shook as she pulled out a half-eaten container of pasta. Still good, mostly. 3 months since grandmother Alara died. 3 months since the landlord changed the locks while Sarah was at the funeral. 3 months of shelters that closed at 7 a.m., of library bathrooms where she washed her hair in sinks, of interviews where they took one look at the address on her application, the shelter's address, and their eyes went flat with dismissal. She'd been invisible before. Now she was less than that. The pasta container slipped, clattered against the metal dumpster with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet alley. Well, what do we have here? Sarah's blood turned to ice water. The security guard stepped into the alley, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Behind him, 2 more. Not regular rent-a-cops. These had the predatory stillness of professionals, of hunters. Trespassing on private property, the first one said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Theft of disposed goods. That's criminal activity in this district. Sarah knew the law, had worked as a bookkeeper for 5 years before Alara got sick, before the dementia got so bad that Sarah couldn't leave her alone, couldn't keep a job, couldn't do anything but watch the woman who raised her slowly forget her own name. The Supreme Court ruled that discarded items have no expectation of, she's got a mouth on her. The second guard circled closer. The auction house pays good money for ones that talk back. The auction house. Sarah had heard the rumors, everyone on the streets had. A place where the desperate and the criminal disappeared, where debts were paid in service, where humans were sold to vampires who had too much money and too little conscience. She ran. Stupid. She knew it was stupid even as her feet slipped on frost-slick pavement, even as her lungs burned with cold air and panic. You can't outrun vampires. You can't outrun anything when you've been eating garbage and sleeping on concrete and your body is running on fumes in desperation. They caught her in 12 seconds. The holding cell smelled like fear and disinfectant. 23 people crammed into a space meant for 10. Sarah counted them automatically, the way she counted everything. 12 women, 11 men, ages ranging from maybe 16 to 70, all wearing the same expression of hollow-eyed defeat. A woman with track marks on her arms leaned close. First time? Sarah nodded. They'll process us in the morning. Judge Marcus handles these cases. 5 minutes per person, max. He doesn't care about your story. The woman's laugh was brittle glass. He owns stock in the auction house. That's illegal. Conflict of interest. Sweetheart. The woman's eyes were kind despite everything. The law doesn't apply to us anymore. Morning came too fast. Judge Marcus had the face of a man who'd stopped seeing people as people a long time ago. He read charges in a monotone that suggested profound boredom. Trespassing, petty theft, refusal to comply with lawful orders. The defendant will be remanded to the auction house for a period of indentured servitude. Length to be determined by the purchasing party, not to exceed 10 years as per statute 47B. Sarah's voice cracked. I have a right to legal representation. You had a right to not steal. Judge Marcus signed the papers without looking up. Next case. The auction house wasn't what she expected. No dark dungeon, no Gothic horror. It was a converted theater in the financial district, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and enough wealth on display to feed everyone in that holding cell for a decade. The irony tasted like copper on her tongue. They processed the merchandise. That's what the handler called them, merchandise. In a backstage room that smelled of expensive perfume and cheap fear. Sarah's group was 12. The woman with track marks was crying silently. A young man who couldn't have been more than 19 was praying in Spanish. Stand straight! The handler, a vampire with dead eyes and perfect manicure, adjusted Sarah's posture with hands that felt like frozen marble. Smile if someone looks at you. The ones who smile sell faster. Sarah thought about biting her. The thought must have shown on her face because the handler laughed. Spirit, that's good. Some buyers like that. A pause. Some don't. For your sake, hope you get a good one. The auction floor was theater seating arranged in a semicircle around a raised platform. Maybe 200 vampires in the audience. Sarah could tell which ones were old money. The stillness, the careful boredom, the clothes that cost more than most people earned in a year. The new money vampires fidgeted, checked phones, talked too loud about their latest acquisitions. Like this was normal. Like buying people was just another Tuesday. Lot 17, the auctioneer called. His voice carried that smooth patter of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Female, 24, clean bill of health. Previous employment as a bookkeeper. Literacy confirmed. Starting bid, 10,000. Sarah stood on the platform, hands chained in front of her, and tried to remember how to breathe. 12,000. 15. 20. The bids came in lazy increments. She was cheap merchandise, probably headed for housekeeping or blood service or worse. Sarah's mind raced through calculations, average indenture length, survival statistics, the probability that she'd live long enough to see freedom again. The math wasn't comforting. $50,000. A woman's voice, sharp and satisfied. I need a new housemaid. Sarah looked up, saw a vampire in designer everything. Dress, shoes, the diamond choker at her throat that probably cost more than Sarah's entire previous life. The woman's smile was cruel. Isolde Ravencroft. Sarah had seen her face in financial magazines. Old money, old power, old cruelty dressed up in Chanel. The auctioneer raised his gavel. 50,000, going once, $10 million. The room went silent. The voice came from the shadows at the back of the theater. Deep, quiet, absolute. Every vampire in the room turned to look. Some faces showed shock, others fear. The auctioneer's hand trembled on the gavel. Lord Nocturne, he managed. We weren't expecting. Clearly. He stepped into the light and Sarah forgot how to breathe for entirely different reasons. Theron Nocturne didn't look like the monster the news feeds made him out to be. No fangs on display, no melodramatic cape, just a man, vampire, in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than the entire auction house. Tall, maybe 6'3". Dark hair swept back from a face that looked carved from marble by someone who understood beauty as a weapon. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Silver. Actual silver. Like molten moonlight. And they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously visible and dissected. 10 million, he repeated, moving down the aisle with the fluid grace of a predator who'd never known fear. For the girl who was just calculating her survival odds while standing in chains. Sarah's breath caught. He'd been watching. Reading her face. Seeing the numbers running through her head like he could see straight into her skull. My lord, Isolde stood, voice honey-sweet and poison-sharp. Surely you don't need a common criminal for your household. I'm certain we can find you. I'm certain, Theron said softly, that I didn't ask for your opinion, Counselor Ravencroft. Isolde sat down. Fast. The auctioneer scrambled for composure. 10 million is highly irregular for a lot of this caliber. Perhaps Lord Nocturne would like to inspect the merchandise first? No need. Theron had reached the platform. Stood close enough that Sarah could smell him. Winter pine and old books and something else. Something that made her hindbrain scream danger even as her heart hammered against her ribs. But I do have a condition. He pulled a leather folder from his jacket, opened it to reveal dense columns of numbers, dates, transactions, a financial ledger of some kind, complex enough that Sarah's brain immediately started parsing patterns. Find the embezzler, Theron said. The auctioneer sputtered. My lord, this is hardly find the embezzler, Theron repeated, eyes never leaving Sarah's face. You have 2 minutes, starting now. This was insane. She was standing in chains, exhausted and starving and terrified, and he wanted her to solve a financial puzzle like it was a game show, like her freedom or whatever passed for it in indentured servitude, depended on her ability to see patterns in numbers while her whole world was crashing down. Sarah looked at the ledger. Her mind went quiet the way it always did when she worked with numbers. The chaos fell away. The fear receded. There was only the data, clean and pure and logical in a way the world never was. 3 columns: income, expenditure, net, monthly reports going back 7 years. Most of it looked clean. Standard business operations. But there, line 47, a discrepancy of 3%, small enough to miss if you weren't looking. And there again at line 89 and 132. Compound interest pattern. Someone skimming consistently, reinvesting the profits, creating a feedback loop that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were looking for. Line 47, 89, 132, Sarah said. Her voice was steady. She'd always been good with numbers. Numbers didn't judge. Didn't care if you were homeless or hungry or scared. Someone's taking 3% monthly. Compound interest patterns suggest 7 years of theft. Based on the account volumes, I'd estimate total embezzlement at approximately $460,000. Silence. Theron smiled. It transformed his face from austere beauty to something that made her stomach flip in ways that had nothing to do with fear. Sold, he said quietly. To me. The drive to Nocturne Citadel took 3 hours. Sarah spent most of it pretending not to stare at the Vampire King sitting across from her in the back of a car that probably cost more than a house. The chains were gone. That was something. Her wrist showed red marks where the silver had burned, but Theron had removed them personally, his cold fingers gentle in a way that made her throat tight. You don't have to be afraid, he said, watching her with those unsettling eyes. You just paid $10 million for me. Sarah's voice came out sharper than she intended. Forgive me if I'm not entirely reassured. Fair. He leaned back, and somehow the casual posture made him look more dangerous, not less. Let me rephrase. You don't have to be afraid of me. The contract you're about to sign, however, should terrify you. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. What kind of contract? Employment. 5 years, room and board provided, salary of $100,000 annually. He said it like he was discussing the weather. In exchange, you'll serve as my personal accountant. The books you just analyzed? I have 5 centuries worth. The last 12 people I hired either quit or went mad trying to make sense of them. And if I refuse? Isolde Ravencroft purchases your contract instead. She needs a new housemaid. Theron's expression didn't change. Also a new blood donor. Her last one didn't survive the year. Not a choice then. An ultimatum dressed up in employment paperwork. What's to stop you from killing me? Sarah asked. Once I've organized your books? Absolutely nothing. Theron's smile was sharp enough to cut. Except that I've spent 320 years building a reputation as someone who honors his contracts. Break that now, and I lose more than $10 million. I lose credibility. And in my world, Miss Ashwood, credibility is the only currency that matters. The car crested a hill, and Sarah saw it. Nocturne Citadel wasn't a palace. It was a fortress carved directly into the mountainside, all black stone and sharp angles and windows that glinted like predator eyes in the setting sun. Older than anything she'd ever seen. Older probably than the country itself. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. Welcome home, Theron said softly. The gates opened without anyone touching them. Magic, probably. Sarah had stopped being surprised by magic around the same time she stopped being surprised by vampires walking around in broad daylight wearing sunglasses and SPF from infinity. The car stopped in a courtyard of black marble shot through with veins of silver. Sarah stepped out, and the first thing she noticed was the silence. No city sounds, no traffic, just wind and the distant cry of something that might have been a hawk. The second thing she noticed was the beast. It materialized from the shadows near the entrance. One moment, nothing. The next moment, 7 feet of pure nightmare. Not quite wolf, not quite anything she had words for. Made of living shadow that rippled and reformed with each movement, fur black as starless night, and eyes that burned like coals in a dying fire. Sarah had seen pictures of obsidian in the news feeds. They didn't do justice to the reality, to the way it moved like smoke given form, to the intelligence burning in those ember eyes, to the absolute certainty that this thing could tear her apart before she managed to scream. It stalked toward her. Theron didn't move to intercept, didn't call it off, just watched with an expression of clinical interest, like this was a test she didn't know she was taking. The beast circled her, sniffed, growled low in its chest, a sound that made her bones vibrate. Sarah should have been terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else, a strange, irrational sadness that made no sense at all. You're lonely, she whispered. The growling stopped. Sarah swallowed hard, forcing words past the fear lodged in her throat. He keeps you here to guard him, to protect him. But who protects you? Who keeps you company when the nights are long and everyone's afraid to come near? The beast sat, just like that. Haunches on the marble, massive head tilted, ember eyes fixed on her face with something that looked almost like surprise. Then it leaned forward and pressed its enormous head against her palm. The shadow fur felt like cold silk, like touching starlight. Sarah's hands shook as she scratched behind ears that weren't quite ears, and the beast made a sound that was almost, impossibly a purr. Remarkable. Theron's voice made her jump. She'd forgotten he was there. Forgotten everything except the creature that was now leaning its full weight against her legs, like it was trying to climb into her lap despite being roughly the size of a small car. Obsidian hasn't let anyone touch him in a century, Theron continued. He sounded genuinely surprised. The last person who tried lost their hand. Maybe, Sarah said quietly, still stroking the beast's head. The last person didn't ask nicely. Something shifted in Theron's expression. She couldn't read it. Wasn't sure she wanted to. Come, I said. Your room is ready. The obsidian wing, because of course it was called that, occupied the eastern section of the citadel. Sarah's room was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked cliffs that dropped away into forest. Black stone walls, furniture that looked both ancient and impossibly comfortable. A bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, and absolutely no locks on the door. You're not a prisoner, Theron said, following her gaze. But the Citadel has wards. You can't leave the grounds without my explicit permission. Consider it a security measure. Consider it a cage, Sarah shot back. If you prefer. He moved to the window and the dying sunlight caught silver in his hair that she hadn't noticed before. Dinner is at 8. Someone will come to show you the way. I'm not hungry. It was a lie. She was starving. But accepting his food felt like accepting the situation, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Theron turned to look at her, really look. And for a moment, just a moment, she saw something in his face that looked almost like understanding. You've been hungry before, he said quietly. Real hunger. The kind that makes you shake. The kind that makes garbage look like a feast. Sarah's throat went tight. I was human once, Theron continued. Turned at 23. It was 1704 and I was dying of consumption in a London workhouse. I remember what it feels like to have nothing. To be nothing. He paused. Dinner is at 8, Miss Ashwood. I suggest you attend, but the choice is yours. He left before she could respond. Sarah stood alone in her beautiful cage and tried not to cry. Failed. Someone knocked at 7:30. Sarah had spent the intervening hour and a half exploring her room like a prisoner, checking for weaknesses. Found none. The windows were spelled shut. The door opened freely, but stepping into the hallway triggered an immediate sense of wrongness that made her retreat fast. Wards, probably. Magical tripwires she couldn't see but could feel like spiderwebs against her skin. She answered the door expecting a servant, found a woman instead, human, maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. Miriam, the woman introduced herself. Head housekeeper. Also the person who'll be keeping you from doing anything stupid while you adjust. I don't need a babysitter. No, Miriam agreed. You need food, clean clothes, and someone to explain the rules before you break one and regret it. She held out folded fabric. Dinner is in 20 minutes. You can wear what you've got on, or you can wear this. Your choice. The clothes Sarah was wearing, jeans and a sweater that had seen better months, smelled like garbage and fear. The outfit Miriam offered was simple. Black pants, white shirt, soft as silk, but probably not silk because nothing that soft could be that affordable. Sarah took them. Good choice, Miriam said. Now hurry up. Lord Nocturne hates tardiness, and you don't want to start off on the wrong foot. I'm pretty sure I already started off on several wrong feet, Sarah muttered, but she changed quickly while Miriam waited outside. The hallway was all black stone and silver veins, lit by lanterns that burned without visible fuel. Magic again. Sarah was going to have to get used to that. How long have you worked here? She asked as they walked. 23 years. And before that? Miriam glanced at her. You ask a lot of questions. I'm an accountant. Questions are part of the job. Before that, I was where you are now, except I was 46, and I'd embezzled from the wrong vampire's casino. Miriam's voice was matter of fact. Lord Nocturne bought my contract, put me to work managing his household, and never once held my past against me. Best thing that ever happened to me. Getting caught. They turned a corner into a dining room that made Sarah's breath catch. Not because it was large, though it was easily 50 feet long, but because of the windows. An entire wall of glass looking out over the mountains as the sun set, painting everything gold and crimson and purple. The table was black wood, polished to a mirror shine. Place settings for two at one end. Theron stood by the window, turned when they entered. He'd changed too. Still all black, but more casual. Shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were all lean muscle and pale skin and veins that traced patterns she tried not to stare at. "Miss Ashwood," he said, "please, sit." Miriam disappeared like smoke. Sarah sat. The chair was more comfortable than anything she'd experienced in months. Years, maybe. She hated how good it felt. Theron took the seat across from her, poured wine into both glasses from a bottle that probably cost more than her old yearly salary. Pushed one toward her. "I don't drink," Sarah said. "Neither do I. Not this, anyway." Theron's smile was slight. "But it's polite to offer." Food arrived. Actual food, not garbage, not shelter rations, not the kind of meal you steal or beg for. Roasted vegetables, fresh bread, some kind of meat that smelled like rosemary and made her mouth water. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up her fork. "When did you last eat?" Theron asked quietly. "Yesterday, maybe the day before." She took a bite, nearly moaned, swallowed hard. "Why do you care?" "Because you work for me now, and I take care of what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have been terrifying. Somehow wasn't, or maybe she was just too hungry to care. They ate in silence for a while. Sarah tried to pace herself. Failed. The food was too good, and she'd been empty for too long. "Tomorrow," Theron said eventually, "I'll show you the treasury. Give you an overview of what needs organizing. For tonight, just eat. Rest. Let your body remember what it feels like to not be in survival mode." Sarah set down her fork, looked at him directly. "Why did you really buy me?" "I told you." "No, the accountant thing is convenient, I'm sure. But you could hire anyone. You could hire a whole firm for less than $10 million. She leaned forward. "So why me? What did you see when you looked at me on that platform?" Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "I saw someone doing math in chains. Someone who looked at the worst moment of her life and immediately started calculating odds, running scenarios, searching for patterns that might save her." He paused. "I've lived 320 years, Miss Ashwood. I've seen thousands of humans in terrible situations. Most of them break, cry, beg. You did math." "Math doesn't judge," Sarah said quietly. "No, it doesn't." His eyes held hers. "And neither do I. You were convicted of theft because you were hungry, because the world failed you, and you did what you had to in order to survive. I'm not interested in judging that. I'm interested in what you can do when you're not fighting just to exist." Something in Sarah's chest loosened, just a little. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." "I want the contract in writing, every term, every clause. No hidden loopholes." "Done. I want my own space. No one enters my room without permission. Already established. And I want—" She hesitated. This was the big one. "I want to know what happened to the 12 accountants before me. The truth." Theron smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. 3 quit within the first week when they realized the scope of the work. 2 were bribed by rival houses to sabotage my records. I caught them, obviously. 4 went mad trying to find patterns in deliberately chaotic data because they couldn't accept that sometimes there is no pattern. And 3 are still working for me, managing branch offices in other territories. You said 12 quit or went mad. I lied. Theron's voice was unapologetic. I wanted to see if you'd accept the answer or push for details. You pushed. Good, I need someone who questions everything. Even me. Sarah should have been angry. Somehow she was almost impressed. What are you really looking for? She asked. In all those records? The same thing you found in 2 minutes on that auction floor. Evidence. Proof. The mathematical trail that shows who's stealing from me, who's plotting against me, who thinks I'm too distracted or too powerful to notice the small betrayals that add up over centuries. Theron leaned back. I rule the Eastern Realm, Miss Ashwood. That's 4 million vampires and 20 million humans, all with their own agendas, their own desires, their own quiet treasons. Numbers don't lie the way people do, and I need someone who can read them the way you do. You need a weapon, Sarah said quietly. I need the truth. Whether that's a weapon or a shield depends on what we find. Outside the window, full dark had fallen. The mountains were black silhouettes against a star-scattered sky. Sarah could see their reflections in the glass. Her, small and underfed and wearing borrowed clothes. Him, powerful and ancient, and waiting for her answer with the patience of someone who'd lived through centuries. Okay, she said finally, I'll do it. But if I find evidence of your crimes in those records, I'm reporting them. Theron's laugh was genuine, surprised. To whom? I am the law in the Eastern Realm. Then I'll find someone higher up the food chain. There is no one higher, Miss Ashwood. Then I'll make it public. The humans deserve to know if their king is corrupt. For a moment, she thought she'd gone too far, pushed too hard. Theron's expression went very still, very cold, ancient and inhuman in a way that made her remember exactly what he was. Then he smiled. You'll fit in perfectly here, he said softly. Welcome to Nocturne Citadel, Seraphina Ashwood. Try not to die before you finish organizing my books. That night, Sarah lay in the most comfortable bed she'd experienced in her entire life and couldn't sleep. Through the window, she could see stars. So many stars, more than she'd ever seen in the city, where light pollution drowned them out. They looked cold, distant, beautiful and unreachable. She thought about her grandmother, about Alara in those last months, when the dementia had taken almost everything, but she'd still recognize Sarah's voice, still smile when Sarah read to her. You're special, little bird, Alara used to say. The world doesn't see it yet, but someday they will. The world had seen Sarah all right, seen her and decided she was worth $50,000 and 5 years of servitude. Except Theron had paid $10 million. That had to mean something. She just wasn't sure what. A sound outside her door made her sit up fast, heart pounding. But when she looked, it was only Obsidian. The massive shadow beast had curled up across her threshold like a guardian, like he'd appointed himself her personal protector. Sarah got out of bed, opened the door slowly. The beast's ember eyes tracked her movement, but he didn't uncurl, didn't leave. You don't have to guard me, she whispered. The beast made a low sound, not a growl, something softer, almost like disagreement. Sarah sat down on the floor next to him, leaned against all that impossible fur. It was cold, comforting. She could feel the rhythm of his breathing, slow and steady like the tide. We're both trapped here, aren't we? She said quietly. You by magic, me by law. Both of us belonging to someone who's been alone so long, he's forgotten how to be anything else. Obsidian's breathing didn't change, but somehow she thought he understood. She fell asleep there, on the floor, curled against a beast made of shadows, and for the first time in 3 months, she felt safe. The next morning, Theron took her to the treasury. Ready? He asked. Sarah looked at the massive doors carved with symbols she couldn't read and felt her hands start to shake, not from fear, from anticipation. Yes, she said. He pushed open the doors. The treasury was chaos. 5 centuries of financial records stacked in no discernible order. Ledgers and account books, and scrolls and tablets and hard drives all mixed together like someone had thrown everything in a room and hoped for the best. Papers covered every surface. Shelves sagged under the weight. The whole space smelled like old parchment and dust and the particular kind of disorder that made Sarah's accountant's soul scream. Oh my God, she breathed. I know. Theron sounded almost apologetic. The previous accountants tried to organize by century, or by type, or by region. None of them got very far before they gave up. Sarah walked into the room, picked up a ledger at random, flipped it open. The handwriting was cramped and ancient, the numbers written in a system she didn't immediately recognize. But underneath the unfamiliar notation, she could see the structure, the pattern. This isn't chaos, she said slowly. I assure you it is. No. Sarah turned to look at him, eyes bright. It's code. Deliberate obfuscation designed to look like disorder. Someone created this mess on purpose to hide something in the noise. Theron went very still. What did you just say? Look, she showed him the ledger, pointed to a series of entries that seemed random. These dates, they're not chronological, but if you rearrange them by the sum of their digits, they form a sequence. Fibonacci. Someone embedded a mathematical key in the chaos. Theron took the ledger, studied it with new eyes. That's impossible. I've had experts look at this for decades. You had experts looking for organization? I'm looking for the code. Sarah was already moving to another stack, pulling records, her mind racing ahead, seeing connections, patterns, the elegant mathematics hiding under centuries of deliberate mess. This is going to take time. Months, probably, but I can do this. I can crack it. She looked up. Found Theron staring at her with an expression she couldn't name. Wonder, maybe, or something darker. What? She asked. Nothing. He shook his head. I'll have Miriam bring you meals. You can work whatever hours you want. Just don't burn out, Miss Ashwood. This isn't a race. Everything is a race when you're running from nothing, Sarah said quietly. She didn't see the way his expression shifted. Didn't see the moment he realized that he'd bought more than an accountant. He'd bought someone who understood that work was armor. That purpose was survival. That staying still long enough to feel your feelings was a luxury neither of them could afford. Sarah spent 18 hours straight in that treasury. When she finally emerged, Obsidian was waiting outside the door. So was Theron, reading in a chair he'd pulled into the hallway like he'd been there the whole time. Find anything interesting? He asked without looking up. Your counselor, Cassian Gray, Sarah said. He's been embezzling for 82 years. $407 million, hidden in a network of shell companies across 17 countries. I can prove it. Theron looked up slowly, set down his book. Show me. 6 days after Sarah arrived at Nocturne Citadel, the council meeting took place. The room looked like it belonged in a medieval castle, which Sarah supposed it probably had been at some point. Stone walls, vaulted ceilings, a massive table carved from single piece of wood that had to be ancient beyond measure. 12 vampires sat around that table, all of them old, all of them powerful, all of them staring at Sarah like she was an exotic insect that had wandered into their domain by mistake. My lords and ladies, Theron said, his voice carrying that edge of command that made everyone sit straighter. My new financial advisor has uncovered some irregularities. Miss Ashwood, please present your findings. Sarah had prepared for this, spent 3 nights building the case, triple-checking every number, every connection. She'd created visual aids, actual charts and graphs because apparently the ancient vampires appreciated old-school presentation methods. She stood, hands shaking only slightly. For the past 82 years, she began, someone has been systematically embezzling from the Eastern Realm's treasury using a network of shell companies and falsified trade agreements. She laid out the first chart, showed the pattern of theft, small percentages that compounded over decades into staggering amounts. The embezzler was careful, never took too much at once, always covered their tracks with legitimate-looking transactions. But they made one mistake. Sarah pulled up another chart. This one showed account numbers, transaction dates, the careful trail she'd followed through 82 years of records. They used the same mathematical pattern in all their shell companies, the same Fibonacci sequence embedded in account numbers. Once I found the key, the whole network unraveled. She looked directly at Cassian Gray, watched his face drain of what little color vampires had. $407 million, she said quietly, stolen over 8 decades from the people of this realm. The money trail leads directly to accounts controlled by Counselor Gray. The room exploded. Cassian stood, chair scraping back. This is absurd. A criminal's lies designed to undermine. Account number 4471B, Sarah interrupted. Cyprus International Bank. Opened in 1941 under the name Graymore Limited. Would you like me to provide the complete transaction history? Or will you save us all time and confess now? His face twisted. For a moment, Sarah thought he might attack her. But Theron was standing now too, and the threat radiating from the Vampire King was palpable. Check it, Theron said softly. Cyprus International, account 4471B. One of the other counselors pulled out a phone, made a call. The silence while they waited was thick enough to cut. It exists, the counselor said finally. Graymore Limited, registered to a shell corporation with Cassian's signature. More silence. Then chaos as half the council started shouting at once. Sarah stood there, watching 82 years of careful theft unravel in real time, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just the cold certainty that she'd done her job. Theron's hand landed on her shoulder, warm despite everything. Grounding. Well done, Miss Ashwood, he said quietly, for her ears only. Then louder. Cassian Gray, you are hereby stripped of your title and position. The full investigation will continue, and you will be confined until we determine the extent of your crimes. Cassian was dragged out, still protesting, still lying. The other counselors looked at Sarah with new eyes, wary, calculating, seeing her for the first time as something more than a human novelty. Isolde Ravencroft watched from the far end of the table, and if Sarah had been paying attention, she would have seen the cold hatred forming in the vampire's eyes. But she wasn't paying attention. She was too busy trying not to shake, trying not to show weakness in front of predators who could smell fear like blood in the water. Theron's hand squeezed her shoulder once. Understanding. This meeting is adjourned, he said. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep again. She kept thinking about Cassian's face, about the way he'd looked at her. Not angry, but confused. Like he couldn't understand how a human, a nobody, a criminal bought at auction had managed to catch him when vampire investigators had failed for 8 decades. A knock on her door, soft, hesitant. Sarah opened it, found Theron standing there in sleep clothes, or what passed for sleep clothes when you were an ancient vampire king. Black silk pants, no shirt. Sarah tried very hard not to stare at the lean muscle of his chest. The scars that crisscrossed his skin like a map of violence survived. Can't sleep either? He asked. How did you know? Obsidian tells me things. Theron glanced down at the beast, who was sprawled across her threshold as usual. Also, I can hear your heartbeat from my room. It's racing. Right, vampire hearing. She was going to have to get used to that. I was thinking about Cassian, Sarah admitted, regretting exposing him. No, just wondering what else is hiding in those records. What other secrets? What other crimes? She leaned against the doorframe. You said numbers don't lie, but they don't tell the whole truth either. They're just data. Context is everything. Spoken like someone who understands the difference between information and wisdom. Theron was quiet for a moment. Then, I was a mathematician before. Before you were turned? Before I was dying, I studied at Oxford, had dreams of advancing the field, making discoveries, leaving some mark on the world that mattered. His smile was bitter. Then consumption caught me. Then immortality. Turns out 300 years is plenty of time to make all the mathematical discoveries you want. After a while, it stops mattering. Sarah thought about that, about living so long that achievements became meaningless, that everything you'd ever wanted felt hollow. That's why you're alone, she said quietly. Not because people fear you, because nothing fills the space anymore. Nothing feels significant when you've got eternity. Theron's eyes met hers, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw real vulnerability there. Yes, he said simply. I was alone before the streets, Sarah told him. When Alara was dying, watching someone forget you in real time, watching their mind unravel while their body keeps living. It's its own kind of death. By the time she passed, I'd been mourning for 2 years. I'd been invisible for longer than that. You're not invisible anymore. No, now I'm valuable, because I can find patterns in numbers, because I'm useful. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Still not seen for who I am, just for what I can do. I see you. The words were soft, honest. They hit Sarah like a physical blow. You don't even know me, she whispered. I know you did math in chains. I know you see loneliness in a shadow beast that terrifies everyone else. I know you spent 18 hours straight in a treasury that drove 12 people to madness or treachery because you couldn't stop looking for the truth. Theron stepped closer, still not touching, still careful of boundaries. I know that you're brilliant and stubborn and brave enough to threaten to expose a vampire king if you find evidence of corruption. That's not nothing, Serafina. It was the first time he'd used her full name. Sarah's eyes burned. She refused to cry, refused to give in to the emotion clawing at her chest. I should sleep, she managed. You should. Theron didn't move, it's wrong, but you won't, so come with me instead. Where? Somewhere you'll appreciate more than sleep. He took her to a room she hadn't known existed, deep in the citadel, past wards and locked doors and corridors that felt older than time. And when Theron opened the final door, Sarah's breath caught. A library. Not the small personal library she'd expected. This was vast, soaring. 3 stories of books lining walls that curved up into a domed ceiling painted with constellations. Reading nooks tucked into alcoves. Spiral staircases connecting the levels. And silence so complete it felt sacred. 500 years of collection, Theron said quietly. First editions, rare manuscripts, books I've saved from burning, from floods. From the casual destruction of people who don't understand what they're throwing away. Sarah walked forward like she was in a dream, ran her fingers along the spines, recognized titles she'd only ever seen references to in other books, things that shouldn't exist outside of museums. Why are you showing me this? She asked. Because you understand that knowledge matters, that preserving truth matters, especially when it's inconvenient. Theron moved to stand beside her. Also because you said you used to read to your grandmother. I thought you might want something to read for yourself now, and it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. Sarah felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she'd built to survive the streets, the shelters, the slow degradation of her dignity. She'd told herself she was fine, that she didn't need kindness, that accepting help was weakness. But standing in a library that smelled like old paper and possibility, with a vampire who'd somehow seen past her desperation to the person underneath, she couldn't maintain the lie anymore. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." Theron's voice was equally quiet. "Stay as long as you want. This is your space now, too." He turned to leave. Give her privacy. Give her the gift of solitude in a place of wonder. "Theron?" He stopped, looked back. "For what it's worth," Sarah said, "I see you too. Not the king, not the vampire, just someone who's been alone so long he's forgotten there are other ways to be." Something shifted in his expression, softened. "Get some rest, Serafina," he said. "Tomorrow we find out what else is hiding in those records. Together." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with 500 years of collected knowledge and the strange, unfamiliar feeling that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth staying for. Sarah pulled a book at random, sat in a reading nook that fit her body like it had been made for her specifically. And for the first time since her grandmother died, she read for pleasure instead of escape. Outside, dawn was breaking over the mountains. Inside Nocturne Citadel, a homeless girl who'd been worth nothing was beginning to understand she might be priceless after all. And in the shadows, Obsidian kept watch. Because some bonds transcend logic. Some loyalties are written in mathematics older than words. The equation was changing. Sarah just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks after the auction, Serafina Ashwood had reorganized 4 centuries of financial chaos and discovered something that changed everything. It was 3 in the morning. The treasury had become her sanctuary, a place where numbers made sense and patterns revealed truth without judgment. She'd been working for 14 hours straight, cross-referencing accounts from the 1800s when she found it. Anonymous wire transfers, hundreds of them. Millions of dollars flowing out of Theron's personal accounts to organizations across the Eastern Realm. Orphanages, homeless shelters, medical clinics in human neighborhoods where vampires rarely ventured, all signed with a numerical code instead of a name. Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at the screen until her eyes burned. The pattern was unmistakable. Every month for the past century, like clockwork. The vampire king who ruled with cold efficiency and commanded fear from ancient nobles was secretly funding charity work and hiding it. "You should be sleeping." His voice didn't startle her anymore. She'd gotten used to the way Theron moved like smoke, silent and sudden. "So should you," Sarah said without turning around. "I'm immortal. Sleep is optional." He moved closer. She could feel the cold that radiated from him, the way the air shifted when he stood behind her chair. "What did you find?" Sarah turned the monitor so he could see, watched his expression shift from curiosity to something harder. Guarded. "These accounts," she said quietly, "the anonymous donations. It's you." Silence stretched between them like a living thing. "How did you know?" Theron asked finally. "The numerical signature. You use Fibonacci sequences everywhere. It's your tell." Sarah pulled up another screen showing dozens of transactions. St. Catherine's Home for Children. The Riverdale Free Clinic, Nightfall Shelter. You've given away almost $200 million in the last 10 years alone. And now you know my secret. His voice was flat, impossible to read. "What will you do with that information, Miss Ashwood?" Sarah stood, turned to face him. He was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Nothing," she said. "It's your money, your choice. But you're curious why I hide it." "I'm curious why you pretend to be heartless when you clearly aren't." Theron's laugh was bitter. "Because heartless kings survive. Compassionate ones get challenged, undermined, seen as weak. The moment the council knows I care about humans beyond their economic value, they'll use it against me, against them. So you suffer in secret to protect them from your own protection." Sarah shook her head. "That's the loneliest thing I've ever heard." Something cracked in his expression. Just for a moment. Then it was gone, smoothed over with centuries of practice. "I was 23 when I turned," he said quietly. Dying. Dying in a workhouse. I watched children die from hunger, from cold, from diseases that could have been prevented with money the nobles spent on parties. I swore if I survived, if I somehow got power, I'd remember what it felt like to be helpless. He paused. Immortality doesn't erase those memories. Sometimes I wish it did. Sarah thought about the auction. About standing on that platform in chains, calculating her odds while rich vampires bid on her like she was furniture. I'm glad you remember, she said softly. The world needs more people who remember what it's like to have nothing. People will say you're biased, that you only defend me because I own your contract. People will say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Sarah moved back to her desk, pulling up new files. Besides, I found something else tonight. Something you'll actually want to see. She showed him the pattern she'd uncovered. More embezzlement. This time from 3 different counselors working together. A conspiracy that spanned 50 years and involved skimming from infrastructure projects meant to benefit human communities. Theron studied the data with the intensity of a predator spotting prey. How much, he asked. Combined, approximately 63 million. The money was supposed to go to schools, hospitals, housing development. Instead, it went to offshore accounts and luxury real estate. Names: Counselors Ravencroft, Ashford, and Thorne. Sarah pulled up their photos, stopped when she saw Theron's expression darken. What? Isolde Ravencroft. His voice was cold enough to frost the air. The woman who bid on you at the auction. Sarah remembered. The cruel smile. The casual way Isolde had mentioned needing a new blood donor, like she was discussing buying a lamp. She's been embezzling from programs meant to help humans, Theron continued, something dangerous building in his tone, while publicly advocating for their rights, while sitting on the council that's supposed to prevent exactly this kind of corruption. What will you do? Expose her, strip her of her position, make an example. He looked at Sarah. Unless you think that's too harsh. I think, Sarah said carefully, that people who steal from the vulnerable deserve whatever consequences they get. But I also think public humiliation is a weapon. Use it carefully. Noted. Theron moved toward the door, stopped. Thank you, Serafina. For what? This is my job. For not judging the charity work. For understanding why it needs to stay secret. He trailed off. For seeing me. He was gone before she could respond. Sarah sat in the silence, her heart doing complicated things in her chest, and tried to remember when exactly she'd stopped being afraid of the Vampire King and started caring about the man underneath. The child appeared 4 days later. Sarah was in the library, her library now, Theron had insisted, when Miriam found her. We need your help, the housekeeper said. No preamble, just urgency in her voice. There's a girl, 9 years old. Her parents were killed by hunters 2 weeks ago. She hasn't spoken since. Sarah closed her book. Why me? I'm not a therapist. No, but you're human. She's terrified of vampires right now, even though she is one. And Lord Nocturne thinks... Miriam's expression softened. He thinks you might be able to reach her, the way you reached Obsidian. Something in Sarah's chest tightened. Where is she? They found the child in a room on the 3rd floor, small for 9, with dark hair that fell in tangles around a face gone hollow with grief. She sat on the floor in the corner, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on nothing. Obsidian was there too. The shadow beast had curled his massive body in front of the girl like a living barrier, protecting her from a world that had become too cruel to face. This is Lyric, Miriam said softly. Lyric, this is Sarah. She's a friend. The child didn't respond, didn't even blink. Sarah sat down on the floor, not close, just near enough to be present. She'd learned about trauma from watching her grandmother disappear into dementia. You couldn't force connection. You could only offer it and wait. I'm not going to make you talk, Sarah said quietly, or ask you questions, or tell you everything's going to be okay, because that's a lie people tell when they don't know what else to say. Lyric's eyes flickered, just barely, towards Sarah's voice. I'm just going to sit here for a while. Maybe I'll read out loud. Maybe I'll just be quiet. Either way, you're not alone, okay? No response, but Obsidian's tail thumped once against the floor. Approval. Sarah pulled a book from her pocket. She'd been carrying it since the library, a collection of logic puzzles and mathematical games. She opened it to a random page. This one's interesting, she said, not looking at Lyric directly. It's about patterns. You have to figure out which number comes next in the sequence. 2, 4, 8, 16. What's next? Silence. Sarah waited. Then quietly, 32, because each number is double the one before. That's called exponential growth. It's how populations expand, how rumors spread, how feelings grow when you're not ready for them from them. She kept going, more puzzles, more patterns, her voice steady and calm, and asking nothing from the broken child in the corner. After an hour, Lyric shifted, just slightly, leaning forward enough to see the book. After 2 hours, she moved closer, sat next to Sarah, still not speaking, but present. After 3 hours, Lyric's hand touched the page, pointed to a puzzle. Her finger trembled. Sarah looked. It was a number sequence, 3, 5, 7, 11. Prime numbers, Sarah said softly. Numbers that can only be divided by one in themselves. They're lonely numbers. Nothing else fits with them. But they're also strong, unbreakable. She glanced at Lyric. Next one would be 13. Lyric's hand moved. She picked up the pencil Sarah had left on the floor. With shaking fingers, she wrote in the margin, 13. Sarah's throat tightened. That's right. You're really good at this. Another word appeared, slower this time. Letters formed with careful precision. Lonely, the numbers? Sarah asked gently. Lyric shook her head, pointed at herself. Oh, sweetheart. Sarah's eyes burned. I know exactly how that feels. The child looked at her, really looked, and Sarah saw the question there. The desperate, unspoken plea. How do you survive feeling like this? One number at a time, Sarah whispered. One pattern, one small piece of order when everything else is chaos. That's how I survived. And you will too. Lyric's hand found hers, small and cold and shaking. They sat there together while Obsidian kept watch and the shadows lengthened and something broken began, impossibly, to heal. Theron found them hours later, still on the floor. Lyric had fallen asleep against Sarah's shoulder, and Sarah was afraid to move in case she woke the child. How did you do it? He asked quietly. Numbers don't ask for anything. Don't demand explanations. Don't hurt you when you trust them. Sarah looked down at Lyric's sleeping face. I just gave her something safe to focus on while the world stopped being terrifying. She hasn't spoken in 2 weeks. Every vampire we brought near her, she screamed. The therapist couldn't get through. Theron knelt beside them, reached out slowly, carefully, and brushed hair back from Lyric's face with a gentleness that made Sarah's heart hurt. You did in hours what we couldn't do in weeks. I'm not special. I just understand what it's like to lose everything. That's exactly what makes you special. His eyes met hers, and the look there was complicated, grateful and awed and something else. Something that made heat bloom in Sarah's chest despite the cold radiating from him. Thank you. What happens to her now? She stays here, under my protection. I've already signed the papers. Lyric is my ward now, my responsibility. He paused. I was hoping you might help. Keep working with her. Not as an obligation, as a choice, Sarah finished. Yes, I'll help. I want to. Something shifted in the air between them, some invisible barrier cracking. They were sitting on the floor with a traumatized child and a shadow beast. And somehow it was the most intimate moment Sarah had experienced since arriving at the Citadel. I should carry her to bed, Theron said. I should get back to the treasury. Neither of them moved. Sarah, Theron said softly. Her name, not the formal Miss Ashwood. If I asked you to have dinner with me, not as employer and employee, just as two people who are tired of eating alone, would you say yes? Her heart hammered. Is that appropriate, given the power dynamics? Probably not, but I'm asking anyway. Then yes, Sarah whispered. I'd say yes. His smile was like sunrise, brief and brilliant and gone too fast. But she'd seen it, and that was enough. By week 5, Sarah had uncovered enough corruption to topple half the council. She'd also started having dinner with Theron every night, not in the formal dining room, in the library. Surrounded by books, in quiet, in the growing certainty that what was happening between them was more than employer and employee, more than king and subject. Something that felt dangerously close to love. It was during one of these dinners that Theron made his announcement. The annual fiscal summit, he said, setting down his wine glass. It's in 3 weeks. I want you to present the Eastern Realm's financial recovery. Sarah nearly choked on her food. Absolutely not. I'm human, a former criminal. They'll never take me seriously. They'll take you seriously when you show them what you've accomplished. Theron spread documents across the library table. You've uncovered 3 major embezzlement schemes. Reorganized 500 years of case. Increased our revenue by 17%. Those are facts. Numbers don't care about your species or your past. Isolde Ravencroft will care. The council members whose corruption I exposed will care. Let them. His voice went hard. You are my chief financial advisor. You've earned that title through merit, not favoritism. And I want the other kingdoms to see what the Eastern realm values. Intelligence, competence, truth. Sarah thought about standing in front of hundreds of ancient, powerful vampires and defending work she believed in. What if I fail? You won't. You can't know that. I've lived 300 years, Serafina. I've seen thousands of people in pressure situations. You don't break, you calculate, you find patterns, you solve problems. Theron moved around the table, stood close enough that she could feel the cold rolling off him in waves. I believe in you. The question is, do you believe in yourself? Did she? A month ago, she'd been eating garbage and sleeping in alleys, and invisible to everyone who mattered. Now a vampire king was asking her to represent an entire realm on the international stage. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was exactly the kind of challenge that made her feel alive for the first time in years. Okay, she said, I'll do it. Good. Theron's smile was sharp, proud. Now let's make sure you're prepared. We have work to do. They worked late every night for the next 3 weeks. Sarah would present the data. Theron would play devil's advocate, throwing every possible objection at her until she could counter them without thinking. Miriam brought food, coffee, reminders to sleep that they both ignored. Lyric started joining them. The child still didn't speak, but she'd write notes, ask questions in careful handwriting. And slowly, so slowly, the hollow look in her eyes began to fade. One night, Sarah was explaining compound interest when she felt Theron watching her. What? She asked. Nothing, just... He shook his head. You're good with her. Natural. I'm just answering questions. You're giving her purpose, structure, a reason to engage with the world again. Theron's expression softened. That's not nothing, Serafina. That's everything. Lyric looked up from her notes, wrote something, pushed it across the table. You're different than other humans. You're not scared. I'm terrified, Sarah admitted. I'm just good at hiding it. Why stay if you're scared? Sarah thought about that, about Obsidian guarding her door every night, about Miriam's kindness, about Theron and the way he said her name like it mattered, about Lyric herself, this broken child learning to be whole again. Because being scared alone is worse than being scared with people who care, she said finally. Lyric stared at her, then slowly nodded. I'm scared too. I know, sweetheart, but less scared than before. Sarah's throat tightened. Yeah, because of you, and Obsidian, and him. Lyric pointed at Theron. You're my people now. And there it was. The things Sarah had been afraid to name. The terrifying, wonderful truth that she'd stopped being an employee and started being part of something that felt dangerously close to family. Theron met her eyes across the table, and the understanding there nearly undid her. They were all lonely, all broken in different ways, all finding something like wholeness in each other's company. The night before the summit, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching stars that looked close enough to touch, and tried to calm the panic rising in her chest. Tomorrow she'd stand in front of the most powerful vampires in the world and convince them that a homeless girl knew what she was doing. A knock. Soft. She knew who it was before she opened the door. Theron stood there in sleep clothes that weren't really sleep clothes because vampires apparently didn't believe in casual. He looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Can't sleep? He asked. Nervous about tomorrow? You'll be brilliant. You keep saying that. Because it's true. He paused. Can I come in? Just for a moment. Sarah stepped back, let him enter her space. Obsidian was already there, curled in his usual spot, watching them with knowing eyes. I wanted to give you something, Theron said. He held out a small box. For tomorrow, for luck. Sarah opened it. Inside was a pendant. Black stone, obsidian, she realized, set in silver. Simple, elegant, beautiful. It's from the mountain, Theron said quietly. The stone the citadel is built from. I had it made for you, so when you stand in front of those vampires tomorrow, you remember that you belong here, that you're part of this place now. Sarah's vision blurred. Theron, let me. He took the pendant, moved behind her. She felt his cold fingers against her neck as he fastened the clasp. Felt his breath, unnecessary for a vampire, but he did it anyway, against her skin. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't step away, stood close enough that she could feel the cold of him along her back, close enough that if she leaned back, she'd be in his arms. Serafina, his voice was rough. If you weren't under contract to me, if the power dynamic wasn't what it is, if you were free to choose without any obligation. Yes, her heart was hammering. Would you want this? What's happening between us? She turned, looked up at him, saw the vulnerability written plain on his face. This ancient, powerful vampire asking permission like he was afraid of the answer. I already want it, Sarah said quietly. Contract or not. Power dynamic or not. I want, she took a breath. I want you. Whatever this is. Wherever it goes, I want it. The kiss happened slowly. Theron gave her every chance to pull back. But Sarah rose on her toes, threaded her fingers through his hair, and met him halfway. His lips were cold, soft, careful in a way that made her ache, like he was afraid of breaking her, like she was precious. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. This complicates things, Theron whispered against her mouth. Everything about this situation is already complicated. Fair point. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, and Sarah felt something in her chest crack open. Some wall she'd built to survive. Some barrier between who she'd been and who she was becoming. They ended up on the floor, backs against her bed, Theron's arm around her shoulders and her head on his chest. Obsidian had moved closer, a warm presence against their legs. Tell me something true, Sarah said quietly. I haven't felt this way about anyone in 300 years. It terrifies me. Me too, except I've never felt this way about anyone. Period. And then we're both terrified together. His arm tightened around her. Better than being terrified alone. They stayed like that until dawn. Not sleeping, just existing in the same space. Two lonely souls finding something like peace in each other's company. And when morning came, Sarah faced the summit with obsidian at her throat and the memory of Theron's kiss on her lips. She was ready. The fiscal summit was held in a convention center that had been built specifically for vampire gatherings. Underground, temperature-controlled, no windows. All the wealth and power in the immortal world concentrated in one space. Sarah stood backstage, hard hammering, while delegates from 6 other kingdoms took their seats. She could see them through a gap in the curtain, ancient vampires in expensive clothes, advisors, council members. Isolde Ravencroft sat in the front row, her smile sharp as broken glass. You've got this. Miriam adjusted Sarah's jacket for the 3rd time. Just remember, they're not better than you. They're just older. That's not as comforting as you think it is. Sarah, Lyric tugged on her sleeve. The child had insisted on coming. Wrote notes of encouragement that Sarah had folded into her pocket. You're the smartest person I know. Show them. Sarah knelt down, hugged the girl who'd started speaking again 2 days ago. Quiet words, careful sentences, but speaking, healing. Thank you, sweetheart. Miss Ashwood, an assistant vampire appeared. You're on in 2 minutes. This was it. Sarah walked onto that stage with her presentation loaded, her data memorized, and Theron's pendant cold against her skin. The lights were bright. The audience was silent, waiting. Good evening, she said, her voice carried across the room, steady despite the fear. My name is Seraphina Ashwood, Chief Financial Advisor to the Eastern Realm. I'm here to present our kingdom's financial recovery and transparency initiatives. She pulled up the first slide, revenue graphs, growth percentages, the concrete proof that her work had made a difference. 6 weeks ago, the Eastern Realm's treasury was in chaos. 500 years of unorganized records, overlapping accounts, and embedded corruption. Today, we've reorganized completely, increased revenue by 17%, and uncovered over $400 million in embezzlement. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, impressed, suspicious, interested. Sarah kept going, showed them the patterns she'd found, the mathematical keys that revealed truth, the systematic approach that could be replicated in other kingdoms. Transparency isn't weakness, she said. It's strength. When citizens, human and vampire, can trust their government's finances, when they can see where money goes and how it's used, that trust builds loyalty. And loyalty is worth more than gold. She was hitting her stride now, the fear receding. This was just math, just patterns, just truth expressed in numbers. The Eastern Realm is proof that accountability works, that investing in communities strengthens kingdoms. That the lights cut out, Sarah froze. The room plunged into darkness. Then emergency lighting flickered on, dim and red, and the main screen behind her blazed to life. But not with her presentation. With evidence, fake evidence, bank transfers showing Sarah's name, accounts in her control, $5 million allegedly stolen from the Eastern Realm's treasury. Isolde Ravencroft stood. Her voice carried across the stunned silence. Fraud, she called. This woman is a criminal, A thief who's conned Lord Nocturne, and now she's trying to con all of us. The room exploded, vampires shouting, delegates demanding answers. Sarah stood frozen on stage watching her reputation, everything she'd built, crumble in real time. These are fake, she managed. I never. Fake? Isolde's smile was vicious. Then explain why your signature is on every transfer. Why the money went to accounts registered in your name. Why you've been systematically stealing while pretending to fight corruption. Sarah's mind raced. The signatures looked real. The documents looked official. Someone had spent time on this, made it believable. She looked at Theron, found him standing in the aisle, his face gone hard and cold and furious. But the fury wasn't directed at her. Investigation required, someone called. Detain her until we sort this out. Agreed, another voice. We can't trust anything she's presented if she's been stealing. Lord Nocturne, Isolde turned to Theron. Surely you see the need for immediate action. Your own advisor, caught in the act, the embarrassment to your realm. Theron looked at Sarah, and in his eyes she saw the choice he was making. Political safety or personal loyalty. His reputation or her freedom. Detain her, he said quietly. Sarah's heart stopped. My lord? The confusion was plain in the guard's voice. I said detain her. Take Miss Ashwood to holding until a full investigation can be conducted. Theron's expression was unreadable. I need time to review the evidence, to understand what happened. Until then, she remains in custody. The guards moved forward. Sarah didn't resist, couldn't. She was still staring at Theron, trying to understand. He'd chosen politics. Of course he had. What else did she expect? As they led her away, she saw Lyric in the crowd. The child's face was stricken. Miriam held her back, both of them watching with horror as Sarah disappeared through the exit. The last thing she saw was Isolde's triumphant smile. The holding cell was silver. Bars, walls, everything. It burned to touch. Sarah learned that fast when she tried to grip the bars and her palms blistered. She sat in the corner. No windows, no clock, no way to know how much time passed. Hours maybe, or days. Time lost meaning in the silver cage. She'd been stupid, so stupid, letting herself believe that Theron cared, that she mattered beyond her usefulness, that any of this was real. Footsteps, multiple sets. Sarah looked up, expecting guards, found Miriam instead, and Lyric. How did you get in here? Sarah asked. Her voice was hoarse. She'd been crying. Hadn't realized until now. Bribe the guards. Miriam knelt outside the cell. Don't worry about it. Listen, we don't have much time. Time for what? To prove you're innocent. Lyric pressed against the bars. She was crying too. I saw Sarah. I saw what happened. Saw what, sweetheart? Lady Ravencroft's servant, 2 nights ago. I couldn't sleep. I was walking and I saw him in your room. He was putting something on your desk. A flash drive. Sarah's breath caught. Are you sure? I'm sure. I drew it. Lyric held up a piece of paper, a detailed sketch, the servant's face, the timestamp, the flash drive in his hand. I showed Lord Nocturne. He's reviewing security footage now. Then why am I still here? Politics. Miriam's voice was bitter. He had to detain you to look impartial. Had to play the game for the other kingdoms. But he believes you, Sarah. He's fighting for you right now. Gathering evidence to clear your name. Fighting how? By risking everything. Miriam's eyes were fierce. By going against the entire council. By proving that Isolde framed you, which means revealing her embezzlement, which means making an enemy of one of the oldest vampire families in existence. He's choosing you over political safety. Over centuries of careful alliances. Over everything. Sarah couldn't breathe. He can't. The cost, he already is. Because he loves you, you stubborn girl. Can't you see that? The door burst open. Guards. Real ones this time. You're not authorized to be here. Leave. Now. Miriam stood, squeezed Sarah's hand through the bars one last time. Trust him. He's coming. They were dragged away. Lyric's crying echoed down the hall. Sarah sat alone in the silver cage and tried to hold on to hope. Outside, she didn't know. Theron Nocturne was burning his world down to save her. And he'd do it again without hesitation. Because some things are worth more than politics. Some people are worth more than peace. And Seraphina Ashwood, homeless girl, turned criminal, turned advisor, turned love, was worth everything. Sarah spent 37 hours in the silver cage before they came for her. She'd counted. Counting was the only thing keeping her sane. Counting heartbeats, counting breaths, counting the minutes since Miriam and Lyric had been dragged away, since she'd learned that Theron was fighting for her, risking everything, counting the ways she'd been stupid enough to fall in love with a vampire king. The door opened, not guards this time. Theron himself. He looked like he'd been through a war, shirt rumpled, hair disheveled, eyes burning with something that might have been fury or fear or both. He had a key in his hand, a stack of documents under his arm, and an expression that made Sarah's breath catch. "Come with me," he said quietly. "It's time." The Grand Council chamber was designed for intimidation. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadows. A circular table carved from single piece of obsidian that had to be 1,000 years old. Screens on every wall showing delegates from all 7 kingdoms watching via satellite feed. This wasn't just a trial, it was theater. Political spectacle with her life as the performance. Sarah walked in with her head high. Theron had given her clean clothes. The obsidian pendant still hung at her throat. Obsidian himself padded beside her, a silent promise of protection. And behind them, Miriam and Lyric. Her people, her family, such as it was. The chamber was packed, every council seat filled. Isolde Ravencroft sat at the prosecutor's table, perfect and poised and radiating satisfaction. Her lawyer, some ancient vampire in a suit that cost more than Sarah's life, shuffled papers with the confidence of someone who'd already won. "The accused will stand," announced Lord Ashford, the council speaker. His voice carried that particular boredom of someone who'd presided over too many trials. "Seraphina Ashwood, you are charged with embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the Eastern Realm. How do you plead?" Sarah opened her mouth. Theron's hand landed on her shoulder. "Not guilty," he said. His voice rang through the chamber with absolute authority. "And I will prove beyond any doubt that this is a conspiracy orchestrated by Counselor Ravencroft herself." Isolde's lawyer stood. "My Lord Nocturne, with respect, you have a clear conflict of interest. The accused is your employee, your companion. How can we trust your objectivity?" "You can't." Theron's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I am completely, utterly biased in her favor. Which is why I've spent the last 37 hours gathering irrefutable evidence. Mathematical proof. The kind that doesn't care about biases or feelings or politics. Only truth." He pulled up the first screen. Security footage. Time-stamped. Crystal clear. "2 nights before the summit," Theron said, "Isolde Ravencroft's personal servant entered Miss Ashwood's quarters. Watch." The footage played, a vampire in Ravencroft livery slipping through Sarah's door, planting something on her desk. A flash drive. The timestamp matched Lyric's drawing exactly. The flash drive, Theron continued, contained falsified financial records, fake transfers, forged signatures, all designed to make Miss Ashwood appear guilty of embezzlement. "Circumstantial," Isolde's lawyer said smoothly. "My client's servant may have been delivering documents for legitimate purposes. At 3 in the morning, unauthorized entry, while planting evidence that would appear 48 hours later at the summit." Theron's voice was ice. "Oh, please." He pulled up another screen. This one showed code, lines and lines of programming. The falsified documents used a specific encryption method, a signature, if you will, embedded in the metadata. Theron looked directly at Isolde. "The same encryption method used by Cassian Gray, your co-conspirator. The one Miss Ashwood exposed 6 weeks ago." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. On the screens, delegates leaned forward. This was getting interesting. "Conjecture," the lawyer tried. "Mathematics," Theron corrected. "Miss Ashwood, would you care to explain?" Sarah stood. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. "The fake transfers show me moving $5 million between accounts, but the timestamps are impossible." She pulled up her own presentation. Numbers and timelines laid out with perfect clarity. "On these dates, at these times, I was with Lord Nocturne, in council meetings, in the Treasury. Multiple witnesses can confirm my whereabouts for every single transaction." She clicked to the next slide. "More importantly, the account numbers themselves are wrong. Look at the structure. Real Eastern Realm accounts use a Fibonacci-based system for security. These fake accounts use sequential numbering. It's amateur work disguised as professional." "And the money trail?" Lord Ashford asked. He sounded genuinely curious now. "That's where it gets interesting." Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. New documents appeared. Bank records, transaction histories, the kind of financial deep dive that only someone who lived and breathed numbers could compile. The 5 million allegedly stolen didn't come from the Eastern Realm's treasury. It came from a private account, registered to a shell corporation called Ravenmore Limited. She looked at Isolde. Would you like to tell the council who owns Ravenmore Limited, or should I? Isolde's perfect composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. You have no proof. I have 60 years of proof. Sarah clicked again. The screens filled with evidence. Decades of transactions. Embezzlement on a scale that made Cassian Gray look like a petty thief. Ravenmore Limited is yours, counselor, along with 14 other shell companies. And through those companies, you've been stealing from multiple kingdoms for over half a century. The total comes to approximately $89 million. The chamber exploded. Delegates shouting, counselors standing, Isolde's lawyer trying desperately to object over the chaos. But Sarah kept going, her voice cutting through the noise. You called me a thief, she said, looking directly at Isolde. You stood in front of everyone and accused me of stealing. But I never took a penny. You, on the other hand, have been robbing the people you swore to serve. Human communities, infrastructure projects, healthcare initiatives. You stole from the vulnerable and lived like a queen on their suffering. This is a fabrication. Isolde was on her feet now, all pretense of composure gone. Lies constructed by a criminal desperate to save herself. Then explain the bank records, Sarah said calmly. Explain the shell corporations. Explain why your signature appears on documents authorizing fund transfers from projects meant to build schools and hospitals. I don't have to explain anything to a human. There it was. The mask finally dropped. The aristocratic veneer peeled away to reveal the contempt underneath. You're right, Sarah said softly. You don't have to explain it to me. Explain it to them. She gestured to the screens, to the delegates watching from 6 other kingdoms, to the human representatives in the gallery, to the citizens who'd been betrayed. Isolde looked around, saw her world crumbling, saw centuries of carefully built reputation falling apart because a homeless girl knew how to read numbers. And she snapped. You think you've won? Isolde's voice rose to a shriek. You think being clever makes you worthy? You're nothing. A vagrant. Trash I could have bought for pocket change. She lunged. Vampire speed. Claws extended, aiming for Sarah's throat. Obsidian moved faster. The shadow beast materialized between them, 7 feet of protective fury. His roar shook the chamber. Isolde crashed into him and recoiled, bleeding from deep scratches where she'd hit his claws. Theron was there a heartbeat later. He caught Isolde by the throat, lifting her off the ground with one hand. His eyes had gone completely silver, no pupil, no iris, just molten silver filled with ancient, terrible rage. You threatened my mate, he said quietly. Each word precise, controlled, more terrifying than any scream. In my territory, in front of my council. That is unforgivable. Theron, Sarah's voice cut through the tension. Don't! He looked at her, the rage still burning, still wanting blood. Don't kill her, Sarah said. Prove you're better than she is. Prove you're the king who chooses justice over vengeance. For a long moment, Theron didn't move, didn't breathe. The entire chamber held its collective breath. Then he dropped Isolde, let her crumple to the floor, gasping. Counselor Isolde Ravencroft, he said, his voice carrying throughout the chamber. You are hereby stripped of your title and position. Your assets will be seized to repay the communities you've robbed. And you will spend the next 500 years in crystal suspension, conscious, aware, watching the world move on without you. No, Isolde's scream was raw. You can't. My family, your family can visit you in the public square where your crystal will be displayed. As a warning, as proof that corruption has consequences, even for the oldest bloodlines. Guards moved in, dragged Isolde away while she screamed promises of revenge, of retribution, of everything she'd do if she ever got free. She wouldn't. Sarah knew that. 500 years in crystal was effectively a death sentence. Isolde would watch centuries pass, watch her enemies thrive, watch everything she'd built turn to dust. Perfect torture for someone who valued power above all else. The charges against Miss Ashwood, Lord Ashford said into the ringing silence, are hereby dismissed. The evidence is clear. She was framed. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. Miriam caught her, held her up while the chamber erupted in conversation, while delegates disconnected from their feeds, while the political machinery of vampire society churned to process what had just happened. You did it, Miriam whispered. You brilliant, stubborn girl. You did it. We did it, Sarah corrected. She looked at Lyric, who was crying and smiling at the same time. At Theron, who was watching her with an expression that made her heart hurt. At Obsidian, still standing guard. All of us. The celebration lasted 3 minutes. Then the secondary explosion started. The first blast came from the eastern wing, a boom that shook the entire citadel, followed by screaming. Alarms. The acrid smell of smoke and burning stone. Evacuate! Theron's command cut through the panic. Everyone out! Now, Saka! But Sarah was already moving, not toward the exits, toward the source of the explosion, because she'd seen something, a pattern in the chaos, a mathematical precision to the timing that meant this wasn't random. This was planned. Serafina! Theron caught her arm. Where are you going? The treasury. If someone's attacking, that's the target. All our evidence. All the records. She pulled free. I have to. Another explosion, closer this time. The floor buckled. Ceiling tiles rained down. And through the smoke walked Cassian Gray. He should have been in prison. Should have been awaiting trial for his embezzlement. Instead, he was here, covered in dust and blood, holding what looked like a detonator. Surprise, he said. His smile was wrong. Broken. Did you really think I'd let you destroy me without fighting back? Cassian. Theron moved in front of Sarah, protective. What have you done? What I should have done decades ago. I've planted 17 bombs throughout the citadel. Enough explosive to bring down this entire mountain. Cassian's finger hovered over the detonator. You have a choice, my lord. Let me walk away free, right now, with full pardons and the return of my assets. Or everyone dies. You're bluffing. Am I? Another explosion, distant but powerful. That's number 4. 13 more to go. Your citizens are still evacuating. Guards are searching for devices they'll never find in time. And you're standing here trying to decide if one man's freedom is worth thousands of lives. Sarah's mind raced. 17 bombs, mathematical precision. Cassian had always been good with numbers. He'd hidden his embezzlement for 80 years using careful calculations. This was the same mind, the same methodical approach, which meant the bombs would follow a pattern. Let him go, she said quietly. What? Theron turned to stare at her. Let him go. Give him what he wants. Sarah met Cassian's eyes. You win. You're free. Cassian's smile widened. Smart girl. I knew you'd see reason. I see that you're a coward who'd rather murder innocents than face consequences. Sarah's voice was cold. But you're right. Lives matter more than justice. So go. Run. Disappear into whatever hole you've prepared. Serafina, trust me, she whispered to Theron. Then louder. He gets a 10-minute head start. Then we deactivate the bombs. Deactivate? Cassian laughed. You can't. They're encrypted. Military grade. Even if you found them all, you'd never crack the codes in time. Maybe. Sarah tilted her head. Or maybe I'm better at math than you ever were. Something shifted in Cassian's expression. Uncertainty. He looked at her, really looked, and saw something that made him hesitate. The codes, Sarah said quietly. They're Fibonacci sequences, aren't they? Like everything else you've done. You can't help yourself. It's your signature. Your tell. His face went pale. 10-minute head start, Sarah repeated. Starting now. Cassian ran. The moment he was gone, Theron grabbed her shoulders. Please tell me you have a plan. I have a theory. The bombs will be placed in locations with Fibonacci significance. Room numbers, distance measurements, something mathematical. But Sarah was already moving, pulling up building schematics on her phone. He's obsessive. Patterns are everything to him. We just need to find his pattern. And if you're wrong, then we die. Sarah looked up at him. But I'm not wrong. I can't be. Numbers are the only thing I've ever been certain about. They found the first bomb in room 89, Fibonacci number. The device was sophisticated, military grade like Cassian said, but the countdown timer showed the sequence clearly. 144 seconds. Another Fibonacci number. Can you disarm it? Theron asked. Sarah knelt beside the device. Her hands were shaking. She'd never defused a bomb in her life. Had no training, no experience. Just the certainty that Cassian's mind worked like hers. Pattern-based. Mathematical. The wires were color-coded. Red, blue, yellow, green. The timer was digital. And underneath everything was a number pad, waiting for a code. It's a puzzle, Sarah whispered. He's making this a puzzle because he can't help himself. The code will be, she thought, Fibonacci sequence. What would Cassian use? She tried 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. The first 5 Fibonacci numbers. Wrong. The timer sped up. Sarah, Theron's voice was tight. I'm thinking. 100 seconds. She tried the sequence backward. 5, 3, 2, 1, 1. Wrong again. 70 seconds. What else? What was significant to Cassian specifically? She thought about his embezzlement, the accounts he'd used, the shell company numbers, and then she saw it. Account 4471-B, the Cyprus account 4471. Add the digits, 16, not Fibonacci but close. The sixth Fibonacci number was 8. Double it for the account branches. She tried 0816. Nothing. 40 seconds. Serafina, Theron's hand on her shoulder. We need to go. No, wait, I almost have it. The account wasn't just numbers, it had a letter. B's second letter of alphabet, 2. And Cassian had stolen for 82 years, 8 and 2. Both Fibonacci. She tried 8, 2, 3, 5. The sequence continuing from where the account numbers ended. The timer stopped. The device powered down. Sarah let out a breath that was almost a tsumu. 16 more to go, she said. Let's move. They found them all. Room 233, Section 144, Corridor 377. Every location a Fibonacci number. Every code a variation on the same pattern. Sarah's hands stopped shaking after the third bomb, stopped thinking after the fifth. Just moved on autopilot, letting the numbers speak to her, trusting the pattern. The last bomb was in the treasury. Of course it was. Cassian's final insult. Destroy the evidence of his crimes along with the woman who'd exposed him. This one was bigger, more sophisticated, and the timer showed 7 seconds when they found it. Run, Theron said. Sarah, run, I'll try. Shut up. Sarah dropped to her knees. This is Fibonacci sequence. I can solve Fibonacci in my sleep. 5 seconds. The code pad blinked, waiting. 4 seconds. What was the last Fibonacci number they'd used? 377. Next in sequence would be 610. But that was 4 digits. The pad only had 3 spaces. 3 seconds. Unless Cassian was using a different sequence. Not pure Fibonacci, but a derivative. Golden ratio, 1.618. Round down, 1-6-1. 2 seconds. Sarah entered the code. 1 second. The device powered down. Silence. Then Theron pulled her into his arms so hard she couldn't breathe. Didn't care. Just held on while he shook, while they both processed how close they'd come to dying. Don't ever do that again, he said against her hair. Do what? Save your life? Risk yours to save mine. He pulled back, looked at her with eyes that had seen 3 centuries but had never looked at anyone the way they looked at her. You're worth more than this citadel, more than my kingdom, more than everything. That's terrible math. I don't care. He kissed her, deep and desperate and full of the fear he'd been holding back. Promise me. Promise you won't sacrifice yourself. I can't promise that. Sarah cupped his face. Because I'd do it again. For you. For Lyric. For Miriam. For everyone who's become my family. That's what love means. Being willing to risk everything. Then I'll just have to make sure you never have to. He kissed her again, softer this time. Come on, we need to find Cassian. Make sure he doesn't try this again. They didn't have to look far. The explosions had destabilized the western tunnel. The escape route Cassian had planned. The blast from his own bomb had brought down half the mountainside. They found him in the rubble, broken, dying, crushed under stones that had betrayed him the way he'd betrayed everyone else. Fitting, he managed, blood on his lips. Killed by my own cleverness. We can get healers, Theron said, but his voice was flat. They both knew it was too late. Don't bother. And Cassian's eyes found Sarah. You won. Happy? No. And she meant it. I just wanted the truth. Wanted people to be held accountable. I didn't want this. Liar, you wanted revenge for every human who suffered. Every community I stole from. He coughed. More blood. You got it. Congratulations. I wanted justice. There's a difference. Is there? Cassian's eyes closed. Feels the same from here. He died before they could answer. Just stop breathing. Stop moving. One more casualty of corruption and pride and the terrible mathematics of consequence. Sarah stood over his body and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a tired recognition that some people chose their own destruction and there was nothing anyone could do to save them. Come on, Theron said gently. Let's go home. 3 months after the auction, Theron Nocturne held an emergency council session. But this time, it wasn't about embezzlement or trials or explosions. This time, every delegate from all 7 kingdoms was watching. Human representatives had been invited. The press, both vampire and human, filled the gallery. This was history being made. Sarah sat in the audience, Miriam on one side, Lyric on the other, Obsidian at her feet, her family, her people, waiting to see what happened next. Theron stood at the center of the chamber, no crown, no formal robes, just the vampire king in a simple black suit, looking tired and determined and more human than he probably realized. "The 5-year contract binding Seraphina Ashwood to my service," he said, his voice carrying to every corner, "is hereby voided, effective immediately. She is free to leave, free to go wherever she wishes, free from any obligation to me or this realm." Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Not now, not publicly. Miss Ashwood has served the Eastern Realm with distinction. She has uncovered corruption, saved lives, and proven that merit matters more than birth or species or past mistakes. Theron looked directly at her. "She owes us nothing. We owe her everything." The chamber was silent, waiting. "Seraphina." Theron stepped down from the dais, walked toward her, and then in front of everyone, in front of 7 kingdoms and thousands of witnesses, he knelt. "You were sold for $50,000, he said quietly. "I paid 10 million, but your worth can't be measured in money. It can't be calculated or quantified or reduced to numbers." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it. "You're priceless. And I'm asking, not as a king, not as your employer, but as someone who loves you more than immortality. Will you stay? Not as my advisor, as my equal, my partner, my queen." The ring inside the box was obsidian and silver, simple, perfect, with a stone that seemed to shift and move like living shadow. A piece of obsidian himself, Sarah realized. The beast's magic forged into jewelry. Her hands were shaking. "Theron, you don't have to answer now. Take time. Think about it. I just needed you to know." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "I needed everyone to know that you're not property, not an employee. You're the woman I love, and whatever you choose, I'll respect it." Sarah looked around, saw Lyric's hopeful face, Miriam's tears, the delegates leaning forward, the human representatives holding their breath. She thought about the auction block, about chains and fear and the certainty that she'd never be anything more than invisible. She thought about Theron teaching her about numbers and loneliness, about Lyric learning to speak again, about Miriam's fierce loyalty, about Obsidian guarding her door every night. She thought about how she'd always believed numbers were the only truth. But she'd been wrong. Love was truth, family was truth, belonging was truth, and she belonged here. "Yes," she said, "but I have conditions." Theron's smile widened. "Name them." "I want a prenup, equal financial control, equal decision-making power in the council, and Lyric becomes our legal daughter, adopted, official, with all the rights and protections that entails." "Done, all of it. Anything else?" "I want to establish programs for homeless humans, for anyone in the position I was in, funded by the money we recovered from Isolde and Cassian." Sarah stood, walked to where Theron knelt. "I want to use what happened to me to make sure it happens to fewer people. That's my price." "That's not a price. That's a gift." Theron slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. "You're going to be a revolutionary queen. I'm going to be an accountant who's very good at budgets and very bad at tolerating corruption." "Even better." He stood, kissed her, and the chamber erupted in applause. Not all of it enthusiastic. Some vampires were clearly horrified by the idea of a human queen, but loud, public, witnessed by everyone who mattered. Lyric ran to them, threw her arms around both of them. "Does this mean we're a family, a real family?" "Yes, sweetheart." Sarah pulled her close. "We're a real family." "Good!" Lyric's voice was fierce. "Because I already picked out my room in the Queen's Wing, and Obsidian is coming with me." The Shadow Beast's tail thumped in agreement. 2 weeks later, the signing ceremony took place. Not a coronation, not crowns and ceremonies, just legal documents making Sarah co-sovereign of the Eastern Realm, equal to Theron in every way that mattered. Equal vote, equal authority, equal responsibility. Her first act was establishing the Human Vampire Equality Initiative, trade agreements that protected both species, labor laws that prevented exploitation, educational programs that gave humans access to vampire knowledge, and vampires' access to human innovation. The conservatives hated it, said she was dismantling centuries of tradition, said humans would never be satisfied, said this would end in chaos. They were probably right about the case, but it was good chaos, productive chaos, the kind that came from breaking old systems and building better ones. Isolde Ravencroft watched from her crystal prison in the public square, conscious, aware, unable to move or speak or do anything but witness Sarah's success. Sarah visited her once, stood in front of the crystal and looked at the vampire who tried to destroy her. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "What you did was cruel and calculated, and you deserve every second of this punishment. But I do thank you." Isolde's frozen eyes burned with hatred. "You taught me that being underestimated is a weapon, that people will dismiss you based on their assumptions. And if you're smart, you can use that." Sarah touched the crystal. "So thank you for giving me the motivation to prove you wrong." She walked away, left Isolde to her silent rage. 500 years of watching the world change without her. Perfect justice. 3 weeks after the signing, they married in the library. Private, just family. Theron and Sarah, Lyric and Miriam, Obsidian and a handful of trusted advisors. No press, no politics, no spectacle. They said their vows surrounded by 5 centuries of collected knowledge, by the books that had given Sarah comfort when she had nothing else. "I promise to see you," Theron said, holding her hands. "Not the queen, not the advisor, just Seraphina, the woman who did math in chains and changed my entire world." "I promise to remind you that you're more than a king," Sarah replied. "That compassion isn't weakness. That being loved doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you strong." They kissed, married, bonded in ways that had nothing to do with vampire magic and everything to do with choice. Lyric stood between them, holding both their hands. "Can I call you Mom and Dad now?" Sarah's eyes filled. "Yeah, baby, you can." "Good, because I already made you cards. For mothers. I know it's not until May, but I got excited." Theron laughed, actually laughed. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, beautiful. They were a family, weird and complicated and built from broken pieces. But a family, 1 year later. Sarah stood in front of a building with a bronze plaque that read, "Ilara's House, a sanctuary for those who need to be seen." It was a community center, homeless shelter, job training facility, medical clinic, all funded by the $89 million recovered from Isolde's embezzlement. All staffed by people who understood what it meant to have nothing. The grand opening had attracted media from across the realm, human and vampire. Everyone wanted to see what the revolutionary queen had built, but Sarah wasn't thinking about them. She was thinking about the people inside, the ones who'd been invisible, who'd been dismissed and discarded and told they didn't matter. She was thinking about herself a year ago, eating garbage and sleeping on concrete and certain that nobody would ever see her. "Ready?" Theron asked. He stood beside her, Lyric on his shoulders. The child had grown, healed, spoken full sentences now, laughed easily, trusted readily. "Yeah," Sarah squeezed his hand. "Let's show them what we built." They walked inside together, past the warm beds and the hot meals and the job counselors and the medical staff. Past the library, because, of course, there was a library, and the computer lab and the classrooms. Past all the ways they were telling people, "You matter, you're seen, you're worth investing in." A young woman approached, maybe 19, thin and nervous and wearing donated clothes that didn't quite fit. "Your Majesty," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. I've been on the streets for 6 months. Nobody would hire me. Nobody would help. But this place, it's giving me a chance." Sarah took her hands. "What's your name?" "Asha." "Asha, you don't have to call me Your Majesty. Just Sarah is fine." She smiled. "And you don't have to thank me. This place exists because people like you deserve better. Because everyone deserves to be seen." "How did you do it?" Asha asked. "Go from nothing to this? How did you survive?" Sarah thought about that, about the math she'd done in chains, about the numbers that had kept her sane, about the vampire king who'd seen her worth when nobody else did. "One day at a time," she said finally. "One small act of courage. One moment of refusing to give up and accepting help when it's offered, even if it comes from unexpected places. That's it? That's the secret? That's it. Plus a lot of luck and some really good people who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Sarah glanced at Theron, at Lyric, at Miriam, who was helping coordinate the volunteers. "You'll find your people, Asha. The ones who see you, just hold on long enough to let them. Asha's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You're welcome. Now go, explore, and ask for whatever you need. That's what we're here for. The girl walked away, disappeared into the crowd of people finding hope. You're good at this, Theron murmured. At what? Being queen, being someone people look to, being exactly what this realm needs. He shifted Lyric on his shoulders. I knew you would be. You couldn't have known. I didn't even know. I knew. He kissed her temple. The moment you did math in chains, I knew you were someone extraordinary. I was someone desperate. You were someone strong. There's a difference, Ron. Sarah leaned against him, watched people moving through the space she'd built, the space funded by recovered corruption, the space that turned suffering into second chances. They auctioned me for $50,000, she said quietly. And now you're priceless. No, now I'm worth exactly what everyone else is worth. Not more, not less. Equal. She looked up at him. That's the whole point. That's what I'm trying to prove. That worth isn't about money or power or species. It's about being human, about caring, about choosing to make things better even when it's hard. Theron kissed her, soft and sweet and full of the love that had changed both their lives. The queen has spoken, he murmured. And as always, she's absolutely right. Lyric tugged on his hair. Can we get cake now? You promised cake. Yes, demon child. We can get cake. They walked through Alara's house together. The vampire king, the human queen, the adopted daughter who'd survived trauma and found family. The shadow beast padding behind them. And everywhere they went, people stopped, stared, not with fear or judgment or contempt, with hope. Because if Seraphina Ashwood could go from the auction block to the throne, then anything was possible. Any life could change. Any person could matter. The math was simple, really. They'd auctioned her for $50,000. She was now worth $847 billion. Not in money, in the lives she'd changed, the program she'd established, the corruption she'd exposed, the hope she'd given to people who'd had none, in the love she'd found in the unlikeliest place, in the family she'd built from broken pieces, in the proof that being seen, really seen, was worth more than all the gold in all the kingdoms. And as Sarah stood in the community center named for the woman who raised her, surrounded by people she loved and people she was helping, she finally understood what her grandmother had meant. You're special, little bird. The world doesn't see it yet, but someday they will. Someday had arrived. And Seraphina Ashwood, former criminal, former homeless girl, current queen of the Eastern Realm, had never felt more clearly seen in her entire life. The numbers had always been her truth. But love, messy, impossible, mathematical love, turned out to be the equation she'd been trying to solve all along. And the answer was simple. She was home.